Good evening and welcome to our last regular Nights at the Museum presentation for the 2022 season. Tonight I have the pleasure to introduce Ann Lundberg. Dr. Lundberg will present Orange City, Red Trucks, A History of the Orange City Fire Department. And I see we have some fire department members here tonight, which we're very happy to see. I know you've been looking forward to another smoking hot topic and fiery speaker. Tonight your wishes will come true. If you are into infernos, conflagrations, and incendiary tales, you have come to the right place. Ann Lundberg has been a member of the Orange City Fire Department since 2000. Before that, while working as a ranger for the National Park Service, she helped fight some western wildfires. After moving to Orange City, she saw an ad in the paper and decided to give structural firefighting a try. She spent the past 2 summers spotting fires at the fire lookout at Park Point in Mesa Verde National Park, Colorado, the 7th national park that she's worked at. Ann taught English and rhetoric at Northwestern College for 21 years and now teaches public speaking at Dordt University. Her presentation tonight is based on many interviews of retired and current firefighters from the Orange City Fire Department and long evenings scrolling through historic newspaper articles online. Before she makes her presentation, please silence your phone and then welcome Ann Lundberg.
Howdy, and thank you, Dutch American Heritage Museum, for having me. My husband, Dwayne Junt, started the season, so I'm bookending at the other end, and I hope I do half as good a job as he did. So here we go. They're going to think that I'm sappy for saying this, but this presentation is a love letter to the Orange City Fire Department and to the men I've served alongside for the last 22 years. Doing oral history interviews was a little closer to the mic? Okay, thank you. Yes, here we go. Not used to the mic thing. I'm used to projecting in a classroom. Doing oral history interviews was a way to get to know the retired firefighters that I'd only met briefly at our annual banquet or heard in the department mythology. So it was good to get to know them. I asked my contemporaries about their experiences of the fires they'd fought and the rescues they'd done, and I learned some interesting things about them. For example, that Dan Roger had once walked out of a house fire carrying a little old lady in his arms after the building had been searched and everyone thought it had been cleared. I also learned that Rob Bruxford and some unnamed accomplices once filled the fire boots of the Sioux Center Fire Department with popcorn. So the interviews and the few pictures of the station, a few of which you'll see in my program tonight, led me to wonder about the earliest days of the fire department and to confirm in the end what an important element the fire department has been for the civic pride of the city, what it represents, in addition to saving lives and property, of course. The department has had its hard times and its share of really destructive fires. But we've learned, and we found new ways of doing things with the men and the women and the newspapers of Orange City. So tonight I'm going to start with the early history of the fire department, 19th century stuff, the Rescue Hook and Ladder Company. Before I talk with some of our firefighters, both active and retired, about their experiences on the fire department. And then, because nobody in Orange City, firefighters or citizens included, can resist attending a really big fire, We'll look at some of the largest fires of the last century that both threatened the community and brought it together. Gotta love it. There we go. Right. On June 21st, 1883, the Sioux County Herald reported big news. The men of Orange have at last organized a fire company and are now procuring the necessary hooks, ladders, buckets, axes, etc. to equip in good style. Within a few days, the boys will be ready for organization and drill. The name is the Rescue Hook and Ladder Company of Orange City. Well, in real life, things don't quite move that smoothly, and the early reports were rather optimistic. The Herald reports again on this matter in November, noting that the Rescue Hook and Ladder Company had had a meetings, about organizing the company, and guess what? They had appointed a committee. Rock and roll. With a man from Minneapolis in regard to a hook and ladder wagon, ladders, buckets, etc. The boys mean business now. As it turns out, it wasn't just the boys who meant business. The same paper, same issue of the same paper, gave notice that the ladies of Orange City have the arrangements well underway for an oyster supper the evening of November 30th for the benefit of the Rescue Hook and Ladder Company. In January, the goods arrived on scene. And of course, because what do you do when you have a fire truck? You give a parade to show it off. So they had a gala day Friday, showing, parading, and receiving the donations, of course, of our public-spirited citizens. Their equipment included several things. And in order so that you don't have to read this, I will summarize. 1 village hook and ladder truck, 5 ladders of various lengths and applications, 4 axes, 2 crowbars, 2 pike poles, 6 rubber fire buckets, 2 brass lanterns, also a hook and pull-down cable and chains. And why they needed the hook part of the hook and ladder and chains is that the way you fought fires in the 19th century was you pulled down the building next door, or you pulled down the chimney using this huge grappling hook. And that way the fire wouldn't spread all the way down the block in blocks that were crowded with wooden structures. So the order wasn't just functional, it also was emblematic of civic pride. The next item on the list is a nickel-plated trumpet for the chief. Also, uniforms consisting of regulation caps of blue cloth, black leather belts trimmed with red containing the word rescue, and red jacket shirts. The next thing the boys want, the newspaper said, is training to respond promptly to the alarm of fire and a good structure in which to keep their truck and apparatus. Cart before the horse here. All of this came not a moment too soon. At 12 o'clock that same night, the Ellerbrook building, housing a drugstore and several residents, caught fire. Shortly after the flames were visible, the alarm was sounded and several of the citizens and a few of the firemen were on scene. Off to a good start. A crowd of over 200 persons assembled at the fire. The members of the rescue company did valiant service. Likely what this means is they formed a bucket brigade using those rubber buckets that they had just purchased and getting the citizens and the firemen at that point in time together to launch buckets of water down the street and then onto the fire. This is not a very effective manner of fighting fires. It's a hard way to get the wet stuff on the red stuff, but at least it bought them time to salvage the content of the buildings, which was their primary focus. It appears that the next week, the Hook and Ladder Company actually held their first meeting. They elected C.W. Carter chief and Finley Burke president, and of course, they formed a bylaws committee. Still in existence today. From the beginning, the department was a community effort. I'm pleased to say that on that evening of March 20th, 1884, at the regular meeting, the fire company recognized that whereas the finances of this company were at time exceedingly low, it would have been almost impossible for them to procure the necessary fund to purchase their outfit, which they now have. Therefore, be it resolved that this company tender to the ladies of Orange City their sincere thanks for their labor, together with the occasion afforded and the substantial financial aid thereby rendered. They remembered the ladies. Good for them.
Sorry, Ann.
Yeah.
Test,
Would you like a
test.
different speaker?
Would you please? This be okay?
You can just move it. Gonna fiddle with this another minute. There we go. All right. So we've had our shares of. Ooh, that's different. Okay. Let me get used to that for a moment. In October of 1886, we had what the Herald called the largest and most destructive fire ever known in the history of our city, which burned 6 buildings, half of a whole city block, including commercial buildings, the Orange House Hotel, where it started, upstairs apartments, law offices, a house. Altogether, huge loss for Orange City. We learned that H. Tenbrook, we're getting some Dutchmen into this now, and M. Reinsberger brought out the hook and ladder outfit, and the company and a large force of aide-de-camp commenced to clear away the one-story resident. Here we go, tearing down buildings with our hooks. And the store occupied by G. Gordon. The fire, however, spread so rapidly that their efforts in that direction were of no avail, and the large part of the work done was the saving of the valuable contents of the 5 buildings south of the Orange House. The good work of saving property, here are the kudos, was carried on by those engaged therein in a systematic way worthy of a veteran metropolitan fire department. And after listing a bunch of people's names, the article continues, no small amount of credit is due the ladies. Rock and roll. But by the summer of 1877, things were not going so well for the nascent hook and ladder company. That summer, after nobody responded to an earlier call for members, the department placed a second call for those interested in joining the fire crew. Then the Herald reports that the hook and ladder had called a meeting to disband and turn the property and the equipment over to the city of Orange City to be kept where it could be used in case of fire. Imagine if we just said, here are the keys to the fire station. Y'all come help yourself when you want. Apparently the problem was people were doing that already. The reason given for the disbanding of the fire department was that people were borrowing stuff. Painters and other workmen had the impudence to carry off and use the ladders whenever their personal necessities demanded. I don't think that would go over very well with Denny Vanderwell today. And then in 1887, November 10th, another Ellerbrook building caught on fire, this time a furniture store. There is no fire department at this point in time. Thus, considerable excitement was created Thursday afternoon by the cry of fire, and this excitement was intensified when people rushed into the streets and saw clouds of smoke coming from the furniture store of J. Ellerbrook. The Herald Bucket Brigade, meaning the employees of the newspaper, consisted of 6 men, and 2 buckets was among the first on the ground, and by prompt action soon had the incipient conflagration extinguished. The bell was rung after the fire was out, and the Orange City Fire Department, represented by about 20 children from 3 or 4 years of age up to 12, half a dozen women, and 20 or 30 men with nothing but their bare hands to fight with and their hats to carry water in, were present to make the usual amount of noise and do the usual amount of ineffective work. If the fire was of a sufficiently serious nature to demand it, which in this instance luckily happened not to be the case. Children playing with matches had lit a small pile of rubbish on fire. Of course, the newspaper, not wanting to let a good crisis go to waste, opined, "This is the first alarm of the season. It's only introductory to greater things which will undoubtedly follow. In the past, we have often and earnestly counseled and pleaded with the people of the town to take some proper action for protection. The City Council has proposed again and again to adopt vigorous measures looking to a permanent organization and thorough equipment for the work, and invited the cooperation of citizens in the matter, and yet meeting after meeting has passed, more meetings. The season of greatest danger is now upon us. Nothing has been done." This picture, I will note, is a stand-in. This is not the Orange City Fire Department. Then I think the straw that broke the camel's back occurred. The De Kruif drugstore caught on fire in September of 1893. Apparently, a shop boy struck a match in the basement, the head of match flew off, it lit the floor, which was soaked in oil. Mr. De Kruif tried to go down the stairs to fight a basement fire, right? He could not fight the fire because it was coming up at him. He was severely burned, and the result was his building was a mass of flame within minutes. They used the bucket brigade. 10 or 12 men got on top of the building, and after some delay, a bucket line was formed. They were trying to save the Reinsberger building, which was to the north. The Fisher building to the south, that shared a wall with the De Kruif building, was a total loss. Okay? They couldn't save that at all. So they just, again, removed content. Here's the kicker and the reason for the picture. The Alton Democrat reports that the Alton Fire Department got a telephone call that evening, asking that our fire engine be sent to Orange City without delay, as there was a conflagration raging in that town. Without delay, the engine and hose cart were attached to vehicles, and every available rig in town was utilized to convey our people. The engine is very heavy, and before reaching the town, the team refused to pull the load. Instantly, a dozen willing people took hold, and for nearly a mile pulled the man killer towards the fire. Arriving there, connections were made with the cistern at the Benton Hotel, and, firefighters, pay attention to this, an inch stream of water was turned on the flames. How about that? An inch, yeah. But the engine renewed hope in those fighting the fire that at least part of town could be saved. You can imagine how much salt that rubbed in the wounds of not having a fire department at all, to have Alton coming with their fancy fire engine and their fire department to save the day. But Alton Fire Department wasn't the only or even the first heroic group on the scene. The young ladies of Orange City, some 20 or 30 with skirts pinned tight, wet and muddy, but working like heroines, did some of the best and hardest work before the Alton Fire Department reached there. They formed a bucket brigade across the street, and watched by a few lazy male animals who refused to render aid, passed hundreds of buckets back and forth, while the men kept the Reinsberger block wet from foundation to the roof with this valuable aid. And the Herald is proud of the ladies of Orange City. In spirit, they were superior, and in action almost equal to men. Everyone is proud of them. Proof that I am not the first woman on the Orange City Fire Department. Again, this fire demonstrated the need for an active, well-equipped fire department in Orange City. The Herald also argued that Orange City itself should buy one of those absolutely cool and fancy engines. So I suspect that this social pressure from our neighbor led to the recreation of the Orange City Fire Department on February 10th, 1897, where they had a meeting to discuss forming a fire company. And this time they had 20 plus volunteers to come save the day. Interestingly, they started practicing immediately. Unfortunately, this led to an accident. This was in May. Arnie Groen was run over by the hose cart and quite badly injured. He's been confined to his home ever since, we learn. So firefighting, dangerous business then and now. May 8th, our fire brigade is out practicing nearly every evening and is getting hang of things down fine. Good job. And they even conducted live fire training. I'd never heard of this in the 19th century, but here it is. They held a test trial on the downtown streets to see how quickly they could put the hose on the fire. So they built this large pile of store boxes, and they placed them on the streets north of the square. They poured coal oil, so an accelerant, over the hole, and then they lit it off. Firefighters do like to light fires, too. Then the alarm was given. And in just 3 minutes, the water was pouring on the flames. The next bit, I don't exactly believe, the oil was not even burned and the boxes were not scorched. The fire was given no time to touch them. It's like, okay, that's a little bit too much boosterism there. But 3 minutes response time. We're still at like 3 or 4 minutes today, so good job. They also, of course, still had their trumpet. See in the pictures here. Look for it in the pictures to follow. Okay, it's still here. They also participated in the July 4th parade in 1899. Okay, so here they are in apparently different uniforms, right, parading their stuff and letting a horse pull their ladder truck, which I think is a good idea. In 1889, they received an alarm bell that was placed on the water tower downtown, and they were in the 4th of July parade yet again, in different costumes the next year. Finally, in 1899, they also got badges. The bosoms of the Orange City firemen these last days are decorated with elegant silver badges bearing the name Orange City Volunteer Fire Department. The badges are neat and brand new. They also denote that the wearers are ready to combat the fire element whenever called on. More of our young men should wear them. One of the things that was very popular in the late 19th and early 20th century were fire tournaments. And there were several held across the state of Iowa, including one in Sioux City in 1893. They had all kinds of amazing events. They had hose pulling contests, they had hose coupling contests, they had steam engine contests, hook and ladder contests, and these results were published in the newspapers in Sioux County. So this was like following your favorite football team. You followed hook and ladder companies as they did this. So this is a really important part of boosterism. They even had smack talk, right? Like our football players have today. Nebraska will be represented in the hose race by the Fremont boys, who have the best pair of couplers that ever followed a cart. I don't know if our boys actually ever participated in these events, but obviously they knew about them. And I'm guessing that they wanted, with all their hearts, to go, because being a firefighter was a big thing and you wanted to show off your skills. So this is the birth of the Orange City Fire Department. Our firefighters have been doing this kind of work for well over 100 years now. They finally, in the early 20th century, got that good structure that the company had been pining for to hold their ladder cart and their hose wagon. There it is between Town Hall and the water tower, right? And that sort of pride in civic action and being able to serve your community really carried on. So in this next section, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of the interviews that I did with our firefighters to give you a sense of the sort of preparation that they had in the past to do their job. So advancing the line, how do we move this forward? First, of course, you have to join the fire department, right? It's a source of pride in the community, has been for over a century, and forever and for always, we've voted in new members of the fire department. Firefighter Don Skur will tell us a little bit about how this whole process worked of joining us.
And it was a close-knit group. It was a family affair. A family of firefighters, and we got along. We were willing to help each other out, back each other up, support each other in the best way we could, and it was an honor to be on the fire department. You know?
Yes, and you told me about the blackball vote.
Oh yes.
And that was two blackballs, and you
early
could
on,
not
if there
join.
were 2 no votes, you were not couldn't be on, and that's. And later on, of course, that was
That was changed, he said at the end of the clip. Yeah, so we don't blackball people anymore, but we still do vote. And we actually vote twice now, once when someone applies to join the fire department, and then after their probationary year, when they decide whether they want to continue and the department decides if they want to continue to have them. So once you're voted on to the fire department, obviously you have to get geared up. Dan Roger will tell us about that process in the, I believe, 1980s.
They issued me the pull-up boots and my skirt coat and a helmet and gloves, and I think we had an Nomex hood, but that was it. So I had pull-up boots for my first set of bunker gear.
Okay, was that standard?
So they have these long coats that reach down to their knees. They have these pull-up boots that reach up to their thighs. They're, at least early on, not insulated, so they're not protecting you from the heat of the fire, they're just protecting you from the water that runs off the fire. You're also not going in the building very often at this point in time. So you're on the department. Well, you have to learn what to do. So, let's see what that looks like, right? Don Skur tells us what training was like when he got on the department and how things changed under a certain fire chief by the name of Fred Dykstra.
he emphasized training. You know, when I first got on, there really wasn't any training. The only training was being at a fire.
On the job.
On the job, you know. But, you know, Fred supported going to fire school, having classes, getting the trucks out from time to time, hooking up hydrants, things like that. So, you know, he was very interested in training because we didn't have that many fires.
Right.
Like we have today, fortunately,
yeah.
you know, per capita. So most of the training then was on the job, except for classes that.
So Fred, who became chief in 1971, instituted a stronger training regime for the department, and as he notes, it didn't make everybody happy. Nothing on the department makes everybody happy. And the department grew from that experience of training. Dan Roger experienced some training with Fred in the department that he tells us about in this next clip. This is one of the Fred methods of getting firefighters to do what they need to do.
I came to the station on a Saturday, and Fred was there, and I was opening a compartment of a truck, and he walked up, and before I could open the compartment up, he shut the compartment, and he says, "Dan, what's in that compartment?" And I named off half dozen things or whatever in there, and he says, is that it? A good educator, is that anything else?
Anything else?
I named maybe a couple more things off, and before he opened the compartment, he says, do you have a key to the station? Because at the time, that's how we got in, we had a key. And yeah, everybody was issued a key. And I had my key in my pocket. It was like, I was so proud of that key, that was my access to the station. And, if you didn't have the key and you ran to the station, you had to wait for somebody that had a key. You'd wait outside the door. So, because I only lived a block away, there was times I was mowing the lawn, I didn't have a key, or it was in the house or something, so I would just run over here. And so I was so proud of the key. Yep, Fred, here's my key. And he says, you name most of everything like in there, but he says, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're the only one that's going to determine whether you know what's in these compartments or not. Nobody's limiting your access. You have full access to the station. You have full access to the equipment. It's your responsibility to learn it and know it. And if you don't, it's nobody else's responsibility or nobody else's fault. You can't blame it on anybody else.
So you can't blame it on anybody else. It's your opportunity to learn and to train. Here's Fred on live fire training. He resuscitated that practice after it had been tried in 1887, and here we are again, setting fires and learning how to put them out.
I think, again, learning about fire kind of puts the fear away. You respect it, but you don't, fear it. Yeah, there are times you probably were in a house that was pretty hot and smoky and maybe burning above you and so on. Your first thought was, why am I doing this?
Well, that's very...
Yeah. So once firefighters are trained, of course, they're able to respond. Early on, obviously we had the bell, and then we had the siren, and then they invented telephones. And for the young people in the audience, Allison, Henry, Michaela, in the center of the picture is a telephone of the old kind, all right? Had a dial on it. You had to dial the numbers, then the dial would spring. Anyway, the fire calls came through the phone. And Don Skur will tell us a little bit about how that worked.
And it was a long ring. In other words, if the telephone rang, it was just a steady long ring. So when you picked it up, you knew it was a fire call. And the lady would report, or whoever was the telephone operator would report where the fire was.
So did you all have to be on the line before she would give the information, or did she repeat the information?
She would repeat. I mean, she could hear click, click, when the phones would be.
Click, click, click. So you get the call, and it's your first fire. Unfortunately, if you're John Lambert, your first fire is somewhat overwhelming. This one.
A garbage truck? Okay, what do you remember about it?
Well, back then we could ride on the back of the trucks. We all jumped on the back of the truck and rode out in the country about 4 miles, and there was a garbage truck, and he unloaded his load in the middle of the road, and we put the fire out.
Okay.
There it was. But they were riding on the tailboard of the fire truck, as you can see in the illustration at that point in time. That practice officially was verboten in the early 1990s, but well before that, firefighters had stopped riding on the tailboard, as exciting as that was. It was a good way to get yourself killed. Denny Vanderwell had a much more exciting first fire experience, which we'll hear about now.
Happened, well, it was not too long after I got on, and that's when we were called over for a mutual aid call to Alton. They had a theater downtown, movie theater, and if I recall correctly, the fire actually started kind of in the back of the theater building. And then it spread to, there was a manufacturing facility adjacent to that, and that was what they called, it was called Silac. And what they basically made is rat poison.
Ooh.
So that was my first large fire. There again, it spread, and it was one of these deals where there again, just like the Vogel fire, there was these 55-gallon drums that were made out of steel, and they got so hot that they would levy, and they'd blow, and they'd come through the roof of the building. And go as high as the trees, and fire everywhere coming out of those. But that was the first major fire, and I remember that correctly and distinctly to this day, that Don Skur and myself were on a 2.5-inch hose line, and we had the nozzle. The nozzles are built with the loops, of course. He was on one side, he was on my left, I was on the right side, and Walt Holman got on at the same time I did, and so did Mert Vanderbroek. We all three of us got on at the same time. Those two were behind us. And what I remember real well is one of these barrels blew up in front of us, and Don Skur, the two guys behind us, flinched or tried to back up, and of course this hose line had quite a bit of pressure on it, and it pushed us. But Don Skur was able enough to get the nozzle from a straight stream to a fog to protect us from the heat of that explosion, but also that pushed us down, and I went down on my right cheek on the pavement, but he was able to hang on to the hose line. So he saved us, and I had one of the biggest bruises on my behind for it.
Yeah, firefighting is dangerous, right? Okay. So from its inception and its desire for a village hook and ladder truck and a bunch of buckets and axes and pike poles, we've really advanced. In 1927, the department bought a brand new Rio fire truck, which it was proud to roll out in 1928. And a couple days later, they tried it out on a fire, but they couldn't do much good with it because the fire was in a house outside the reach of the water mains, so they couldn't actually use the hydrants to pump water. So that one was a complete loss. As you know, and I won't record this history for you, the Orange City Fire Department does a good job of keeping its apparatus updated, including even such mundane things as tanker trucks. And this is one of my favorite stories, just to show you how innovative the department is about using materials. This is Tanker 66 that was built in 1982. The fire department had been using a 1952 truck that was loaned by the Civil Defense Department, and that truck broke down. So the firemen raised $2,000 to purchase a, get this, 1972 Mack truck with over 1 million miles on it from the Ready Mix plant in town. This was going to be their new truck. And then they moved the tank from the old truck to the 1972 Mack. As firefighter Mert Vanderbroek reported, all we have to do is lift the tank off the old one and put the new truck under it. That's all we have to do. Well, that, of course, and clean it, because our department always cleans stuff, and paint it red, right? Very important. And I don't think I've mentioned yet that the tank that was being recycled before it was a tank on the civil defense vehicle had been a tank for carrying molasses. Okay. That tank went out of service in 2009. Also, of course, we had the Jaws of Life. 1981, $8,500 was donated by the wife of Mr. Fozzie Simon, who was killed in a car accident near Kansas City earlier that year. And the family came to the fire department and said, They use the jaws of life to extricate us from this vehicle. Does our fire department want this? And of course, yes, we do. We want one of those. Here's Fred on the jaws of life.
It was quite a plus for Orange City because we were one of the first ones around here to, have anything like that. And we went on a few calls that were quite a ways away because we had jaws and so on. Get called once in a while.
So, like to see.
Like to Sioux Center? Oh yes, and beyond. Right. And beyond. So the Jaws of Life not only helped us get people out of car accidents and farm machinery and other things more quickly, but it made us hugely popular on the block. Today, I think one of the things Denny Vanderwell said was the most important innovation was the thermal imaging camera, which we got our first one, huge clunky thing in the early 2000s that lets us see fire through the smoke. They're a lot smaller now, a lot more portable. Good tool, but Denny suggests that we also lose some of our sensitivity to fire if we're reliant on those tools. So kind of an interesting tension between skill and equipment. So I know you're all excited to hear about some big fires. So here's 100 years of fire in brief. Okay, the first action shot we have of the fire department in action comes from 1915. Mr. Jelgerheist deeded his photos to the museum and they shared them with me. So that's some pretty good fire action. And there is this weird hit and miss, home jerry-rigged apparatus engine in front that's been hooked to a pump, streaming water at the fire. Someone thought this was an important enough fire to make not one, but 2 postcards of. And the only thing I can learn about this fire is that Mr. Coy was having a fire sale about 2 weeks later. Silent Sioux in 1946. Apparently a tall kid reported the fire to the Tom Cool home around 1:30 Saturday afternoon. And by 3 p.m. the whole plant was destroyed because this was a big one. Cool thing is you can see our 1927 Rio in action in these shots. Fred Dykstra was there that afternoon as a small child watching the whole thing happen, and I asked him if by any chance he saw himself or his father, who was a firefighter at that time, in any of these photos. Sadly, the answer was no. Probably because the photos are the back of his head. Yeah. In March 1948, the grade school, formerly the high school, where the current grade school is today, it had been built in 1892. Maybe that was a reason that you wanted a fire department. You're starting to get really big, expensive buildings. The high school caught on fire. The grade school caught on fire. I call it the same thing. 11:30 at night. Someone coming home from work saw it. The fire department was called, of course. They hooked up both their old 1927 Rio and their new fire truck and went to work. Firefighters Vanderstoep and Kalsbeek were stationed on the roof of the high school. The buildings were connected. This is the old building, the new building, which is the grade school today. They were connected. So they were on the roof of the high school, which is now the grade school, trying to keep the fire in the high school that was then the grade school from spreading into the high school. Okay. It's all very confusing. It took me a while to figure all that out. So they were on the roof of the high school shooting water at the southeast corner, and they stayed there for 3 solid hours under a hail of flying embers while playing the hose with 100 pounds of water pressure on the north wall of the old building. Their work saved the high school building. And about the time that the second floor of the high school grade school was burning out, a white pot of coffee was seen going up the wall of the high school building. Mysteries. right? It turns out it was Albert Gruters of the Corner Cafe supplying pots of coffee and sandwiches to the firefighters during the night. He stayed on the job until 5 a.m. The paper reports the firemen are all for Mr. Gruters. Fred Dykstra was in 3rd grade when this happened, and he remembers that he lost his new tennis shoes in that fire. But happily, they were recovered from the cabinet later, albeit reeking of smoke, so his tennis shoes were not lost. On July 1st, 1956, the steeple of the First Reformed Church, which had been built in 1875, oldest church in town, I believe, was struck by lightning at 4 a.m. And by 4:30, the steeple had crashed to the ground, and the wind-fanned fire had swept down the bell tower into the attic rafters and at least one spot into the front entrance wall, where the blaze worked itself out from the inside out through the siding. And the crashing steeple narrowly missed a couple of firefighters and actually fell on their fire hoses. Working from inside of the building, firefighters drenched the rafters and the beams in the attic space, although they were constantly afraid that the 2,000-pound bell above them might fall on their heads. Happily, it did not. So this made a tremendous torch over the town all night long, and while the fire was burning, the good people of Orange City were doing what they did, which is salvage, right? They moved every article from the interior of the church, including furniture and pianos, outside the building so that it would be saved. And here they are moving the kitchen utensils out, forming a double row to get that stuff out. In 1962, we did experience probably our biggest tragedy on the fire department. I will let Don Skur tell you something about that.
The Quaker Dairy Farm on Middleburg.
Okay.
And there was a fairly long lane going into the farmstead. And there were cars parked along the gravel road and also on both sides of the lane entering the farm place. So it was a narrow path for vehicles to enter. I was riding with George Huizinga at the time, and we were in the pumper truck, and followed by the tanker truck. And from what we understand, and of course neither George or I observed it because we were ahead of it, but along the side of the pumper truck there was a rail. And the thinking is that he probably tried to grab the rail and slipped and went under through in front of the wheels. That's one story. Another story was that maybe he was sitting on a vehicle on the side of the road, and as it went by, he slid under. But we think that he tried to grab onto the truck and slipped and went under through the...
Henry Yonker was a little bit closer.
Somebody else took over.
Right.
But I was right with it. In between those cars, and he jumped on that truck. And he missed.
Yeah.
But it was, to me, it was people's fault, because the people that were already there had no business
Being
there. It was the fire department that had the business, nothing else.
Right.
So that always did bother.
John Skur remembers going to the hospital with Lee Cry because there was a call to donate blood to help Mr. Duvin, and they waited there until they got the sad news that Mr. Duvin did not make it. The whole town turned out for the funeral, and the firefighters in their dress uniforms formed an honor guard for the casket as it left the building. There were some changes in the community after that Don tells us
Those
about.
days, unfortunately, whenever the siren sounded, people would get in their cars, head to the fire station, and follow the fire trucks to find where they were going. and it was not uncommon to have a steady stream of vehicles following the fire truck. Well, after this accident, I think people, the whole community was shocked. And of course, there were many letters written and a lot of conversation about, this is not the thing to do. And I think it was the beginning of the end of people following the fire truck.
In 1964, the Vogel Paint building caught on fire at about 12:30 when an employee was pouring a mixture of paint and solvent into a hopper, which ignited by static electricity. And minutes later, the building was a roaring mass of flame. This was the first major fire call that Roger Rogger and Fred Dykstra experienced. Roger came from the drive-in which he owned at that point in time. It's where Subway is now. And he came on scene and waited for the trucks to come because in that day they carried their bunker gear in the trunks of their car so that they could just go directly. Denny Vanderwell experienced this fire when he was no taller than knee-high to a grasshopper.
To be back in the earlier years, when they alerted the firefighters that there was a fire, it was done by the city siren, and along with a phone. There was a phone that you had, or your phone, and it rang a steady ring in your house, and that was how they alerted the firefighters. And of course, when the siren would go, then the thing it would do is you'd go to the fire station, and the doors would be open, of course, and you'd look, and there was a chalkboard inside the fire station, and that chalkboard would have written on it the address or where the fire was at. And of course, that day, it was around noonish or 1 o'clock, if I remember correctly, and the fire whistle or siren went off. Pedaled my bike downtown to the fire station and said Vogel Paint on the chalkboard. Well, of course, that's just down the street on Albany Avenue at that time, adjacent to the college property. So, yeah, had to go check it out. Of course, it was a pretty big fire. There was a lot of smoke, and later on there was some of these 55-gallon drums that were exploding and so on. So it was filled the whole afternoon in and part of the evening,
And here's Don Skur, who fought that fire.
Factory and the office, there was a fire door.
Good.
And we maintained one line from the office side to the fire door, so it wouldn't get into the office. And as long as the line was on the fire door, it kept it. As soon as you take the water off, you could see it just get red. So it kept it from going into the office.
Okay.
Hank Yonkers was there too.
55-gallon drums fly up in the air, explode, and we were on the roof.
My.
Part of that building was back here where the 55-gallon drums were, and they come out of the roof. And what are we doing sitting on this roof? Pumping water.
Did you get off the roof?
No.
Nope, we did our jobs. Golly. They used thousands of gallons of water on that fire, leaving only about 3 inches in the city reservoir. And at one point, Orange Cityans were asked to curtail their use of water so there would be enough water for the Vogel fire. There were huge crowds that gathered, and part of what the firefighters did was to control those crowds, keep them back so they wouldn't get hurt by those exploding tanks. Fred Dykstra remembers that we had people bringing us cold drinks and people bringing us sandwiches, and we had a lot of people out there. We were the hit of the town for a while. In 1988, the Farmers Co-op gas station exploded.
5:30 one evening, built up a small propane tanks that they refilled. They had them in the building, and evidently one of them was leaking. And they had a gas-fired heater in the building.
Uses of the aerial. So they had just purchased an aerial ladder truck, and they used the aerial ladder to control the fire and keep it from spreading down the block. In 1991, 2 weeks after the Farmers Co-op had caught on fire again in the middle of the night. Let's see if we can make this work. The Tipsy Tulip, otherwise known as the Dutch Treat Pub, caught on fire. Ah, there it did. Yep. Right, middle of the night, firefighter Mike Verdorn was running newspapers around, and he saw it light up. It's the oldest brick building. It was the oldest brick building in Orange City, built by Henry Hospers of Local Brick in 1883. The smoke was so thick from that fire that it set off smoke detectors to the north side of downtown. They were worried that the Coast to Coast hardware store to the north would also go up in flames. So that was the agenda of the fire department during this fire, was to keep the rest of the block from burning. Several firefighters working on the roof of the structure were forced to flee the roof when flames broke through in the form of a massive fireball, which in turn seemed to hang above the structure for a period of several seconds before dissipating. We got mutual aid on that one from Alton, Sioux Center, and Morris. Main cause, faulty wiring. Sound familiar? Major loss, right? Major loss. Kearns train wreck. Here we'll let Dan Roger tell you something about it.
I got on. When I saw that,
that's
yes,
Roger.
We did have one light. Sioux Center was there, and they did have one light. And that was beautiful because you could see and walk around there. I thought, that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
Well, we had a discussion about it, and we had a few that were against it. They just didn't want it. I said, I'll do it myself. So I went on and solicited and got enough money to, I had to go.
So it was a dark, stormy night.
Midnight, it was dark, and it was cold, but not barely cold. It was foggy out, somewhat foggy. And I remember stepping out of the truck and seeing all these, they almost looked like bowling pins. They were actually a ham hock, or a pig knuckle, or pig's feet, that one of the cars had broken open, exploded open in the head-on collision of the trains. And these frozen at minus 20 degrees or whatever, they were so cold that they frosted over during this time. I think the call was in December, if I remember right. So I mean, it was fairly cold out, but it was so cold that these pig knuckles either frosted over or frosted over in the rail car, but they were laying all over the highway. So as we walked toward the train, we're kicking these, kind of like sounded like bowling pins, frozen hocks off the highway. We were hocking them, and so just the scope, because it was so dark.
Bad accident. The result was that Roger went out asking various companies for money for a light tower to better light our scenes at night, which has been a huge benefit for the fire department. Last fire of the century, Hawkeye Building fire, right? 2008, Sunday afternoon, not a lot of people downtown. Someone noticed it. By the time the firefighters made entry on the south, the fire was really roaring. They made it to the second floor and were driven back by the heat. New panels had been put in to cover the windows, and that made it hard to ventilate the fire, so the heat and smoke would escape. This is one of those examples where we didn't win the battle, but we won the war. Prevented the fire from spreading again up the block to L&K Clothing, which is now Holland House. We had a lot of mutual aid, as you can see in this picture, including 3 aerial trucks from Sheldon, Lamar's, and Sioux Center. Our aerial truck was a little wobbly at that point in time, and this fire led to us getting our present Ladder 61. a definite improvement with a lot more reach at 105 feet than our old ladder had. So finally, good structure in which to keep their trucks. This is where we started, right? Little shed at the bottom of the fire tower. We moved for a while near the City Power and Light plant into a little white building where the REO was kept until fire trucks were moved downtown south of the Treasury office. Denny Vanderwell talks about the progress that we've seen here.
And granted, when I got on, the station was a year old, and what they had from what they had before downtown at the band shell. When I was a Cub Scout, Webelos, that's where we met in their meeting room. Just a cracker box. And the trucks parked in at angles and stuff just so they could get squashed in there. The old tanker truck with a handyman jack on the back end, holding the back end up because it was too heavy to sit on the tires for 24/7. So when they drove the truck out of the station, then jack would tip off, and then they would, those are, you know, from what they had and what they came to, and now what I had when I first started, what we have now is just phenomenal. I mean, we have experienced in the city backed us, and that's the coolest.
It is the coolest thing. From a hook and ladder brigade to a 105-foot ladder, the rescue hook and ladder has been tried by fire more than once. Our businesses, our houses, our schools, our churches, and our barns have felt the heat. But the bell, the siren, the telephone, the pager have gone off. And the members have climbed on those trucks, prepared by their training to put the wet stuff on the red stuff as best they can. And the people of Orange City, they've been here. They've been ready. They've been ready with pots of coffee, with sandwiches, possibly with donuts, and with moral and financial supports. All together, all of us, to save the day. Thank you. I know it's late, and if you have to go, I understand, but before I open it up for questions, I would like the members of the fire department, my collaborators who are here tonight, to stand up. Fred couldn't be here, but I see Don. Don, there he is. And Hank Yonkers couldn't be here, and Rob Bruxford can't be, but John Lambert can. As can Roger, Dan, and Lee Roger, 3 generations of firefighters. Denny Vanderwell, our past and current chief. And I'd also like to thank the Northwestern College Library, where the audio archives and their transcripts are being housed. You can find them on Northwestern Commons, the library webpage. Questions? Sarah?
You mentioned how women kind of played a role in peripheral things, and I think I picked up on that you were the first woman firefighter, is that correct?
Yeah, aside from Students First and the only one so far. So you can join.
Who's ahead today, Alton or Orange City? Who's winning that?
Well, I'd like to say that we are, but they just got a new station. So you can see how this goes. We've got this. Oh no, now we have this, and that works with Sioux Center too. We've got audio clips about that, but spared me. Well, thank you. I'll be happy to answer questions individually if you want to come up and talk to me. You have a good evening. Thanks for coming out on this lovely night. Oh, and I think Al has an announcement. Right. Al, here's the...
Thank you. Well, thank you, Ann. Thank you, Ann. This concludes our Nights at the Museum season for 2022. We do want to say that we appreciate your support for the museum and your attendance. Your support encourages us to continue making improvements to the museum, the exhibits, and the gardens. Just this last weekend, we planted 500 more tulips and 150 daffodils. So next spring, we should see the results of our labors, and it should be even more colorful than it is now. We also plan on making some improvements to the settlers area in the museum, and we are going to be trying to obtain some funding for repairs to the county or the country school courthouse, or country schoolhouse, excuse me. Also, be on the lookout. We're going to be having another Books at the Museum program this winter. Last year it was a big success. Jim Scopp and Keith Feinart led this study. And on deck this winter will be Black Soil, Josephine Donovan's epic of settlement of the Sioux County out by Granville. Donovan relied heavily on her father's detailed memoirs of those years here. Also, there will be Lord Grizzly by Frederick Manfred, and he takes a look at the early trappers and hunters in the area. Revenant was one of the movies that was made based somewhat on that book. Also, short stories by Ruth Suckow, and she grew up by Hayward, so that'll be another interesting book for us to look at. In addition, we have one more, well, it's sort of a surprise, but down the road, we may have a reader's theater here sometime in the winter, so we're looking forward to that as well. So we want to thank you for your attendance, and I think we should give Dr. Ann Lundberg one more round of applause. Oh, and we do appreciate her blazingly interesting performance. Thank you.